Hello, Patricia here, welcoming you to the Poetry Pcast. Today I have a chorus of poets who have published with Cuttlefish Books, and they've come along to read to you. They are Robin Smith, Julie Bloss Kelsey, Allyson Whipple, and Lenard D. Moore. A proper anthology of poets, I hope you'll agree. I'll put the links to all their books in the show notes, and if you'd like to purchase them yourself and read their work more widely, you can do it. There will, of course, be other links for you to follow, so don't forget to go and visit the show notes when you finish listening to me. I generally record these episodes for you some weeks in advance of editing them, although this time there was a considerable period of time between recording and editing. The point is that if an episode makes me smile some weeks later, or in this case, even more than that, I think there's a good chance that you'll enjoy it too. Today is part one of a two-part series. It was due for publication back in the summer, but when I tell you that Deborah Piccology is one of the poets featured in the series, you might guess that I didn't think it was respectful to publish it at the time I'd planned. So this week you'll hear from some of Deborah's Cuttlefish poet friends, and next week I'll bring you a recording of Deborah's last reading for us. And another little snapshot from Debbie. She's such an inspirational poet, even if she's not with us anymore to inspire us with new work. So without further ado, let's go and meet the poets. We're going to start with Robin Smith, who's reading from her book, The New Green. Enjoy. I think most of you will know this poet, Robin Smith. Robin is co-founder and co-editor of Whiptail Journal of the Single Line Poem, a journal I know many of you have submitted to and been published in. And I wanted to ask, actually, Robin, while we're talking about single line poem, do you have a thing that you would rather not call a monoku?
Yes.
Would you care to elaborate, or are you just going to leave it at
that? Because I think that people have a very specific idea of what they think that is. And I think that it has a specific connotation in a lot of people's minds, that they think that I think it carries with it in a lot of people's minds an experimental, the idea that it's something experimental.
Mm-hmm.
And I, Kat and I did not want to, part of what the reason we wanted to do Whiptail was to be able to show people that one line haiku are not experimental.
Mm-hmm.
They can be,
Yeah,
but they're not.
no, that's an interesting take. It's one I hadn't thought of before. You're right. Many people do think when you talk about monoku that they are an experimental poem, whereas, yeah, I mean, they belong in the canon of haiku, don't they, as single line poems. And as you say, they can be experimental, but they don't have to be. So, Robin, hello, nice to have you on the podcast.
Hello. Nice to be here.
So the book you're going to read from is The New Green, which you wrote under the name Grix. And I get very confused. It could be my age, but Grix, is that a dead name now, or is it a pen name? What's the sort of status of Grix?
It's just a haiku. It's just a pen name. It has nothing to do with gender or anything.
So we don't wander around calling you Grix. You are Robin.
That's correct.
Okay, wonderful.
And I have it, yeah, and I'm not using it anymore. So
okay, so no confusion at all going forward.
mm-hmm.
Now, I have been thinking a lot about the name of your book, The New Green. And when I read it, I thought, okay, it's taken the title from the very last words in the book, but I could be being very thick and I've missed something else. So I wonder, Robin, have I missed something else?
I guess it depends on what your interpretation is, what you've gotten from it.
Well, I think we'll get on to that in a second because I tend to read haiku, one-line haiku or otherwise, on a craft basis, first off. And my take was very much what Shane wrote, one of the Poetry P editors, Shane Pruitt. He said about the New Green, he said, the New Green wraps you in scenes from the real world of beauty, pain, and quiet acceptance, right now as it exists and has, time and again, for each of us. And he advises us to read, breathe, and connect. So that's where I am. Should there be anything else I'd be looking for? Any other effect that you would like me to be feeling when you read this poetry?
It depends, I think, on the individual. And I did an interview with Paul Miller. He asked me, he said, do you feel like people need to know about you, your personal story to enjoy your work, to understand your work, to get something out of it? And I think there are a number of answers to that. There's, well, one, I really don't write poetry for anybody else. So in a sense, it doesn't really matter. Other people understanding and enjoying my poetry, I'm happy that other people can get something out of it. It's a huge bonus to me, but it's not my goal. My goal is to write for myself. But do I think it helps? Well, I think it really depends on the person. I think, people who may share some of the same kinds of experiences that I have had, or have the same, share some of the same issues that I may be living through. Of course, those if they know about those things, then they're probably going to connect better, right? Or if they write in a similar way, like I tend to, even if I am writing something that doesn't seem like it's personal, it's usually very personal, because I'm the tree, I'm the bird, I'm in every poem. It's just the way that I write. But sure, I think that could matter, but I don't know. I don't know that makes any difference. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
people will like it or they don't, whatever. I mean, not to be rude, but
No.
you know what I mean? Like, it's just, there's something for everybody, right? Like, if they don't like my work, they'll like somebody else's,
No, I didn't take that as rude at all. I think it's just life, isn't it?
Right.
It's perfectly fine to say that, and I think most of us don't write for anyone else, but it's just a happy bonus that maybe somebody else will
Right.
find
Yeah,
something in it,
exactly. Exactly. Like, sometimes you write something and you just don't really think much of it, and someone will send you a message and send you, tell you something really nice that you're like, wow, it's amazing that it affected somebody else like that. But it makes you feel really great, right?
It absolutely does, and often they see something in it that you wouldn't have seen
Yeah,
when you were
exactly. Exactly. Honestly, I think that's one of the best things about editing is, I mean, I like to edit better than I like to write. I mean, it's like, it's like being a poetry midwife, like birthing these baby poems. To me, it's the best thing.
Oh, that reminds me of a poem by George Swede, and I can't think of the the actual poem now, but it's very much like that, where he looks into it's probably quite old fashioned now, I guess, but in the old days they would have lots of cradles in the maternity ward, and it's he sort of likens those babies in the cradles to his notebook with all the haiku sitting in them, just waiting to be birthed. If I come,
Right.
I know where it is, so I will add it to the I'll add it to the recording when I get hold of the book and read it. Read it. Anyway, without further ado, I think it's time for us to maybe take Shane at his word, but we're not going to read, breathe and connect. We're going to listen, breathe and connect. So, Robin, would you do the honor of reading to us?
Damselfly, I too am mistaken for what I am not. Damselfly, I too am mistaken for what I am not. Pulsing through my blue vein of goldfinches. Pulsing through my blue vein of goldfinches. Black swans calling everything into question. Black swans calling everything into question. Another blue jay lands to fine-tune the silence. Another blue jay lands to fine-tune the silence. Learning the pine needles in my spine. Learning the pine needles in my spine. Daylily through the darkness. Day lily through the darkness.
Robin, I mean, a great reading. Thank you very much. But what I always enjoy is that when you hear the poet read, they sometimes put stresses where you hadn't thought of putting them. And that happened particularly in the pulsing through my blue. I'd never made the stop at blue, pulsing through my blue vein of goldfinches.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
I know because everybody thinks it's blue vein.
Yeah.
It's my sky. I just renamed the sky my blue. I originally is pulsing through the sky.
Mm-hmm.
Vein of goldfinches is a group of goldfinches.
Yep.
So, pulsing through the sky is boring.
Yep.
So I just changed it to blue and then I just made it personal because it's over my yard. So
The effect it has on me when you put that stop at blue, like you said, it makes it more interesting anyway to use blue rather than sky. But you've got the layering meanings of the word blue as well. So it's got a sort of
yeah,
many faceted meaning to it as well, which I had picked up, but not in such a stark way when I was reading through them myself. So,
mm, mm.
so thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
And there's one poem in your book. Well, I mean, lots of poems that I wish you could have read, but we're not giving the whole book away. But there is one poem that I wish you'd chosen because it moved me very much. And I hope it's okay if I read it once to
Oh
you and then
yeah,
perhaps you can read it back to us
sure,
as you wrote it. But
sure.
as I'm reading it, it is the one that is glasswing butterfly, laying bare my secrets. And I wonder if that's how you wrote it, or have you got another blue up your sleeve to warp my mind, Robin?
No, last swing butterfly, laying bare my secrets. That's it.
It's beautiful. Thank you very much indeed.
Mhm.
Loved hearing you read, Robin. Thank you.
Thank you.
Today we're joined by Julie Bloss Kelsey. Hello, Julie. Lovely to
Hello.
see you again. Thank you for joining us. Now you're going to read to us from your Cuttlefish book, After Curfew. And Rowan Beckett says of this book that you take us on your own evolutionary journey as we get to witness your transformation from this cute, awkward little duckling into a beautiful, confident black swan. So, Julie, would you say that these poems are a representation of your teenage years?
Very much so, unfortunately.
So, how difficult was it to pick the poems to read to us today?
It was really hard. Yeah, they're pretty personal poems, so
I can imagine there are stuff I will not publish because they're just too personal. I think about how other people would feel sometimes reading them. Like I read some of your poems and I thought, oh my goodness, if I was writing those and my mother was reading them, she'd still haul me in and give me a good telling off. There you go. We're going to hear those. Now, you say in the author's notes that this book was inspired by another Cuttlefish poet, Rowan Beckett, who wrote a piece on your piece of blurb for you. Can you tell us a little bit about that inspiration?
yeah, it was a really fun experience. Rowan had written their book, Hot Girl Haiku, and they had a reading and kind of a book celebration on Facebook. And I'd never been to a Facebook book launch party. And so I attended that. And as part of that, we were supposed to write response poems. There were other activities, but that was the one I remember. And I wrote the poem Face First in a Stranger's Lap, Tequila Shots. And that was when Joshua Gage with Cuttlefish is like, oh, I'd like to read more like that. And I'm like, oh, seriously, I don't know that you would. I was really struck that Rowan's book to me reminded me of all the cool girls in college.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very much the nerdy girl. And so I started exploring poems of just my awkward adolescence and young adulthood. And I wrote most of this collection in one night.
Oh, wow. My goodness. That was inspiring then, wasn't it?
Very much so. I've never had that happen before. So it definitely was.
Wow. It has yet to happen to me, I have to say. But, after this reading, who knows? Maybe I'll write about my awkward teenage years. Anyway, Julie, shall we hear some of your authentic teenage and young adult poetry? Julie Bloss Kelsey, uncut.
After curfew, ducking each time we see headlights. After curfew, ducking each time we see headlights. Cruising for boys, no idea what to do if we catch one. Cruising for boys, no idea what to do if we catch one. Crammed into some teen's car, a bottle of whiskey. Crammed into some teen's car, a bottle of whiskey. Strangers at the bar, trying to remember my fake name. Strangers at the bar, trying to remember my fake name. Face first in a stranger's lap, tequila shots. Face first in a stranger's lap, tequila shots. Third base, I buy a pregnancy test just in case. Third base, I buy a pregnancy test just in case.
Julie, thank you very much. I was really pleased that you put that last one in. It startled me because I can't imagine being the teenager that needed the pregnancy test, because I was very much what you described yourself as, the nerdy one. And you had another poem in there that I'm going to read if you don't mind. It is Goody Two Shoes. No one suspects a thing. Goody Two Shoes. No one suspects a thing. But maybe in your case, it looks like there might have been something to suspect. But in my case, I was so boring. There was literally nothing that my parents needed to suspect. My sister still takes the mickey out of me because of that. But now, Julie, you're a very sensible mother of three. And I wondered, do you have any daughters? Which might be a bit of a personal question, but are there daughters?
I do. She's 15.
Ooh. So, how would you feel now if she was able to write some of the poems you've just been writing?
My daughter is actually a very fine young actress and sings well.
Mm-hmm.
And I really want her to express herself however she wants to.
Mm-hmm.
That said, I really had a cause to reflect back because I've always thought of myself as a nerdy girl in a goody two shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And I look back at these poems and I thought, my God, if any of my kids had done some of these things, this collection starts actually some of the poems. I was only 13 for some of the poems I'm writing about, and I
Wow.
thought, wow, that really puts it in a different light. So I don't know if you have the book handy, but this cover, this is actually my 8th grade picture. This is my school picture.
So 8th grade is what, 13-ish?
Yes.
Okay.
And the poems actually span probably up until 21 or 22. So it was a pretty wide range I was writing about there.
Wow, that makes this first one even more sad, really. Roller rink birthday, my friends pay a boy to skate with me. Oh, Julie, my heart's breaking for you.
Yeah, that
Oh
happened.
dear. Oh no, stop. That was purely from your imagination. It's brilliant. It's I mean, there are some sort of, like I said, that one about the pregnancy test startled me. But there are these poems, I mean, speaking as a girl, I mean, you can relate to them really. I'm sure your daughter can relate to them. I'm sure my daughter can relate to them. They're just timeless, aren't they? So I thank you very, very much, Julie, for coming along and being embarrassed with us today. But you didn't look it. You looked fine. Thank you, Julie. Take care.
Thanks for having me.
Our next poet is Allyson Whipple. Poetry Peeps will know Allyson very well. She's often reading and talking to us here. And indeed, I guested on her podcast, The Culinary Sajiki, which I think is on hiatus because, Allyson, you have projects you want to get going, I believe.
I do. Well, and I always envisioned Culinary Saijiki as a book. And at some point, I realized if I'm putting out new content, I'm never going to get around to putting the book together. And my goal for 2024 was to have a book manuscript by the end of the year. So I really had to stop doing the podcast and focus on actually putting the book together.
And how's it going? Because we're a quarter of the way through the year.
I know. I thought it was going to be a lot easier. I am chipping away at it. I am styling the book after Haiku World, and I thought, oh, it'll be easy. Just pick the seasonal reference and slot the poems in, and it's not going as easy as I thought it was. In part because sometimes food is inherently seasonal, and sometimes it becomes seasonal with the reference of a different seasonal word. So I'm trying to still figure out what to do with that, but it is going.
Okay, so you've made a start. Brilliant news.
That's the most important part, right?
Yeah, well, I think so. I mean, can't go anywhere unless you get it started. So I must remember that because I too am working on a project which I have started. But anyway, less said about that, the better. But today, anyway, you've come along, Allyson, to read from Postcards from Texas. And I find this book really interesting, not just because I enjoy your haiku, but it makes me curious because you're not a native Texan. You don't live there now. And yet, to quote Zoe Faye Stint, you have crafted an earnest love letter to Texas. And we're going to hear that in the poetry today. But I wondered, did any of the other places that you have lived or that you do live in engender such a love of place that you had to put pen to paper and write about it?
Well, I grew up in Ohio, and I have a deep fondness for Ohio. But I still remember very clearly the first time I came to Texas. It was December 30th, and I flew out of Cleveland. And Cleveland is not the most fun place to be in December. And I flew out, and I remember getting out of the airport, and it was in the 70s, and there were palm trees on the highway. And I'm like, what is this incredible, not cold place. And I fell in love with it. And Austin is in the hill country, and there's so much more to Texas than just the hill country. There's coast, there's prairie, there's giant mountains, and desert. It is really, it could be 5 different geographies. And I fell in love with that landscape very deeply and lived there for 15 years. And I still miss it every day. But Texas was becoming a place that was becoming unlivable for many reasons. So now I live in St. Louis, Missouri, and St. Louis is beautiful. I've only lived there for 2 years. So I think at some point I will be able to start writing about where I live now, but I think you also need to live in, I didn't really start writing about Texas earnestly until I'd been there 4 or 5 years. So I think you have to live somewhere for a while and really get a sense of the place before you can write about it well. But I did love Texas, and I at some point I thought I would live there the whole rest of my life, and it just wasn't going to work out. So now I'm here.
Okay, well, let's hope this move works out just as well as the Texas one did initially, and maybe this time you found the forever place. You never know.
Maybe.
We'll keep that on ice and see. Anyway, Allyson, would you please share some of your love letter with us?
Yes. First, bluebonnets. Gunshot trauma kit in my school bag. First, bluebonnets. Gunshot trauma kit in my school bag. Daylight savings time. The wren sings at sunrise no matter what. Daylight savings time. The wren sings at sunrise no matter what. For sale sign gone. Around the demolition notice, rain lilies. For sale sign gone. Around the demolition notice, rain lilies. Bring thunder. One grackle call before the storm. Spring thunder. One grackle call before the storm. After a nightmare, hearing white-winged doves foreshadow sunrise. After a nightmare, hearing white-winged doves foreshadow sunrise. Where the prickly pear became compost, sunflowers. Where the prickly pear became compost, sunflowers.
Allyson, I particularly respect, although I can't say I enjoyed it, that first poem, the juxtaposition between the wonder of nature and the horror of what the natural can do to us. I mean, because, humans are natural, I guess. And I can't imagine, how did you put it? Gunshot trauma kit in my school bag. That's really hard to get my head, as a European, that's really hard to get my head around that idea. It's quite horrible, but well crafted. Well done.
Thank you.
So, but there is another one whose juxtaposition I loved. Can I read it to you?
Of course.
Cigarette drag, last gasp of wildflowers in November wind. Cigarette drag, last gasp of wildflowers in November wind. And this had a great effect on me because it reminds me of my parents. Lost both of them now, because they were, throughout my childhood and teenage years, desperate smokers. And I mean that in the way that the Irish use the word desperate smokers. And I can just see them being so desperate for that last drag, that cigarette drag, that they would be out in a cold November wind with the last of the wildflowers. So the whole thing all the images really jumble up in my mind and remind me of them. So cheers, Allyson. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the reading. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. I'm very fond of that one, and that one could never find a home. And then I put it in the book. But they, sometimes the home was just in the book itself.
Yep, absolutely.
But I've always been quite fond of that piece.
No, it's a lovely one. Thank you. Hopefully I didn't turn it down. But anyway, Thank you, Allyson. Hello, Lenard. Welcome to the podcast for the very first time.
Hello, thank you for having me on the show.
It's a treat for me, honestly, as indeed a very brief meeting in Cincinnati this year. Now, Lenard, you had some very exciting news. You're going to be inducted into the North Carolina Literary Hall of Fame this autumn. And I wondered, I'm not from North Carolina myself, and nor are a lot of the people who are going to be listening and watching you. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, wow, I'm so humble and honored that I'm going to be inducted into the North Carolina Literary Hall of Fame. That's a big deal. You have people like Maya Angelou, Fred Chappell, on inducted into the Literary Hall of Fame. Paul Green, the famous playwright. And of course, everybody knows who Maya Angelou is. So she's also inducted, and on and on. A.R. Ammons, just a lot of well-known poets and writers. Yeah, I'm humbled.
I think it's brilliant. Congratulations, well done. And if anyone who's listening and watching to us wants to know a little bit more, I will put a link to in the show notes so you can go and have a read, because I think you can read pieces of work by all the people inducted. And I don't know if the work for you is up already, but if people
Thank you.
keep
I'm
going.
glad you're going to put a link up for others.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Now, you're going to be reading to us, Lenard, from another Cuttlefish book, A Million Shadows at Noon, a book you wrote to give us deeper insight into the Million Man March. Many of us won't know what that is. I didn't know that until I picked up your book. So could you tell us a little bit about that historical event, please?
Yeah. The Million Man March. Wow, we're coming up on 30 years ago that took place, October 16th, 1995. And it was a march. It happened in Washington, 1 million black men. And, it was to affirm brotherhood, family, love, those types of things, and the positivity in the community. And so all those guys came together. So I guess you could see how the title "A Million Shadows at Noon" came from the Million Man March. So but I hope it works on a multiplicity of levels. You have shadows there, and shadows could tell you something there. We do know if there are shadows, the sun must be out. You don't have to say that. We know that. And then a million, that's quite a bit. That's a large number or a huge number. And then at noon, we know at noon the sun is high up in the sky. I don't really want to explain my title, but I just thought I'd say a few things.
I think if people get hold of the book, they should certainly read the preface by, and I'm not sure I'm saying this, pronouncing his name properly, by, is it C. Rosenau?
C. Rosenau.
Yeah.
She also put out a scholarly book a couple years ago titled Lenard D. Moore and African American Haiku.
Oh, okay, that's something I've got to get hold of then. That's good. But that's worth reading, because she gives she goes into quite some depth, which is unusual in a preface, about the work contained within the book too. So it's worth reading that. I mean, I always read the preface anyway, but I know a lot of people sort of skip over that. But I think that's a really interesting preface to this book too.
Well, I call it one long poem, or it is a haiku sequence, or a long poem that employs the haiku form. And so I tried to do a number of things with that, and tried to be innovative, try to do things I hadn't seen. And it's also intergenerational. I could go on and on about it. So there you go.
That's brilliant. I was going to ask you what your thinking was behind writing it as a sequence, but that's interesting. Just what you've just said, trying to be innovative. I could never say that word properly. doing things that you haven't necessarily seen before, and I think it works. Although you haven't chosen to read to us in a sequence, the poems we're going to read, you haven't chosen to read the sequence, but I think we're going to hear them now. Let's have a listen.
2-lane street, one by one, the men keep coming into fall light. 2-lane street, one by one, the men keep coming into fall light. I give you a little insight. You see, the men keep coming. There's a very famous blues poet named Sterling Brown, and he wrote poetry, and one of his poems about the strong men keep coming, or something like that. And so this could be an allusion to his great blues poem. Or, of course, I don't think I had it in mind when I was writing it, but later, after it was published, I saw that when I was analyzing my own work. And then, of course, I tried to incorporate a lot of music into my work. You see the repetition with one. And then, sometimes I try to incorporate meter, try to incorporate euphony, soft sounds, try to incorporate assonance, the repetition of vowel sounds, try to incorporate alliteration, the repetition of consonant sounds. I could go on, but I don't really want to describe my own work. I want to leave it up to the reader. Slow sunrise, where the fallen leaves end, the man's wheelchair gleams. Slow sunrise, where the fallen leaves end, the man's wheelchair gleams. Darkening sky, a row of folding chairs left in the plaza. Darkening sky, a row of folding chairs left in the plaza. I don't want to analyze, but I will say this about the first line. I think that shows how the passage of time there, all day, and then, it's getting dark, or the sky's darkening for some reason. And then we could see emptiness there too, because the chairs are left in the plaza. And so perhaps the chairs are metal. Most likely they are, and they're left in the plaza. When we had, you think about a contrast, the chairs, and of course they're steel, whereas the men, they had movement when they were marching, and of course they're human beings. Sun Plaza, 1 million shadows darken foot by foot. Sun Plaza, 1 million shadows darken foot by foot. That particular one, it's obvious that there's a contrast. It's obvious that there's a repetition, and then it's obvious that we have two nouns in the first line, and a noun in the second line, as well as a verb, darking. Autumn Plaza, 1 million shadows at noon, strong men marching. Autumn Plaza, 1 million shadows at noon, strong men marching. I think I just mentioned that the last line, I believe, is a surprise ending, and it has alliteration in it. And we know that there's the continuous action with the ing word there, or ing word, or gerund. 3 weeks into fall, 1,000,000 brothers stand tall. Oaks sway mutely. 3 weeks into fall, 1,000,000 brothers stand tall. Oaks sway mutely. Again, we look at the last line, we see that element of time there, also the season. And then you have a numerous amount of guys there in the second line. And then you can see the oaks, which is the natural world. And we know that they are silent. And there is movement with them as they sway.
Beautiful. Thank you. Lenard, Jerry W. Ward Jr., in a piece named Ocular Voice, placed after the preface in the book, says that you, Moore, understands how deceptively simple forms can be used to make complexities accessible. And I thought this statement was overwhelmingly true when I read the final haiku in your book. And I just wondered, could you read that for us?
Night after the march, reading the 1,000,000-man pledge to my pregnant wife. Night after the march, reading the 1,000,000-man pledge to my pregnant wife. I don't think I need to say anything else. I mean, you could see how it is intergeneration and how hopefully, according to the poem in the future, then, you know, the generation go on.
I read this, Lenard, and I'm sorry, I'm going to sound terribly white privileged here, and I apologize for it, but I read this one and my heart broke because I imagined myself and my husband being in this situation, and we've never had to worry about our kids. You know, he would never have to, he would never have to read to me about the 1,000,000-man march when I was pregnant, because my kids probably, please God, would be perfectly all right. And that made me so sad when I read it, because there must have been millions of people in that situation who could only hope for the best. I'm not being terribly articulate about that, but do you get where I'm coming from on that one?
Oh, yeah. You know, you're safe in your house, your sanctuary, but then as soon as you go outside, you know, you hope you come back home, because there are a number of things, so many things going on throughout the world.
Absolutely right. But that sad as it made me feel, I just thought that was a beautiful piece of work.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I know, and I might be a bit behind the times because there might be more than one book, but I know you have at least one other book out, The Conversations with Lenard D. Moore by John Tsiang, who, again, hope that said that right. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, yeah, it's coming out in November. University Press of Mississippi is publishing it. So it is a collection of interviews. I think there are about 16 in there. So, yeah, so hopefully I give my insight into writing haiku, into performing with jazz musicians and jazz bands, into teaching, into writing in other forms, such as short stories, plays, you name it, and writing into a multiplicity of poetic forms. So there are a number of things we touch on in the interview. I don't want to give away too much, but I hope readers will purchase a copy. Matter of fact, you know, and I hope professors and teachers will teach the work, and I hope it'll get widely reviewed. So let's see what happens.
Thank you very, very much, Lenard, for coming along and reading to us. As I said at the beginning, it's been a while since I recorded this podcast, so I wanted to give you some updates from the poets. Robin continues apace with work at Whiptail, the journal of the single-line poem. And in addition to that, she chivies all of us editors along to nominate our favourite haiku for the Touchstone Individual Poems Awards. And of course, Haibun Awards too. Which reminds me, I'll be nominating this year once all the Poetry P video prompt poems are in. All you have to do is nip along to our YouTube channel and leave your poems in the comments for Linda to read. And the deadline for that is the 30th of November. If she chooses you, you will be featured in the podcast and in the next journal, 624. Of course, some of you are coming to this late and have missed the deadline. Never mind, there's always next year. And what you should do is just head over to our website, see what we're up to. There's always something. Well, usually something. And for those of you who are not on the mailing list, may I suggest politely that you get on the mailing list, because sometimes I just invite the poets who are on the mailing list to send us a submission. Now, I also promised to read you the George Swede poem that Robin and I had been talking about. Here it is. Today's Notebook, a Neonatal Ward. Today's Notebook, a Neonatal Ward. And that's by George Swede, from The Way a Poem Emerges, a Haiku Trinity and Beyond, published by Let Press in 2022. If you'd like to read that, or many of the other things that I'm going to talk about or have talked about in the podcast, all links will be in the show notes. Now, Julie will be back with us next year to read to you from her book, Grasping the Fading Light. That was published in 2023, and it's a book of 65 short poems on the theme of post-traumatic stress disorder and recovery from childhood trauma. She says, I hope this book will help those on similar journeys to feel less alone. I hope so too. Julie, we'll see you again soon. And you know, I find Julie inspirational in writing such personal work, in not worrying about what people think about her once poems are out into the world. I think she's right to do it. I was listening to someone on a podcast this morning talking about Robert Graves, who apparently said of his poetry and his prose that he doesn't worry about what people think, because if he were to worry, then he would never make progress. And he's sort of right, because if you worry about it, you hold yourself back, don't you? Well, I do, anyway. So my goal for 2025 is to let fly. Just write pieces which may or may not make me or my readers squirm. But either way, I'm not going to be worrying about what people are thinking of me. Big words. I wonder if I can actually do it. Cheers for the push, Julie. And if you want a little bit more Julie, she's on the board of the Haiku Foundation, and she has a column, New to Haiku, which is written specifically for new poets. As I said, there'll be a link in the show notes, and if you ferret around on the Foundation's site, you'll find articles by Robin, Allyson, and Lenard on there as well. It sounds like Allyson's been having great fun with her book, Postcards from Texas. Back in April, she had a late official launch at the Protagonist Cafe in St. Louis, where, as you now know, she lives. And as she pointed out to me, we haiku poets tend to interact with one another all the time. I think we're quite a sociable group, actually. But in terms of the vast literary scene, we are but a tiny part of it. And so many people, if they know anything about haiku, are convinced that they are a 3-line poem of 575 syllables. Allyson is doing her bit to change that and introduce contemporary haiku to her community. And one way she's found of doing that is to host a quarterly ginkgo in her area. I think that's just a fabulous idea. People get to know each other, the community, the area, and as a bonus, a little bit about haiku. And you know what? I might just try and do the same thing here. And I wonder, have any of you got any wonderful ideas for bringing haiku into the wider world? Let me know. Allyson invites you, if you're in the St. Louis area or visiting the St. Louis area, to get in touch and see if the ginkgo is for you. And if you don't have her email, just get in touch with me and I'll pass your details along. While I was catching up with Allyson, I asked her how her goal to have her book manuscript, the culinary Sajiki manuscript, ready by the end of 2024. Well, apparently she's not going to achieve it, but she feels that scrapping the first run through and starting all over again was the right thing to do. Because now she's working with a better sense of structure and focus that she perhaps didn't have before. And there is a way that you can help Allyson. Because looking for poems, and I know this to be true, takes up such a lot of time, and it's just not an effective use of her time when she's trying to get the book all done and dusted and out into the world. So she started to open things up to direct submissions and is currently taking submissions of holiday-focused food haiku. Her deadline is the 31st of December for that. And if you have any, there's a Google form which I'll put in the show notes and you can submit to her directly. And then, of course, there's Lenard. Oh my goodness, the man is a colossus. I honestly don't know where he gets all his energy from. I have a ton of updates from him. Some I'm going to talk about now, some in the show notes. So that book, Conversations with Lenard D. Moore, which was edited by John Tsiang, is out now, and you can get hold of a copy. You know where to find the link. And he never sits on his laurels, and his latest book is an anthology of 50 poets writing from their different perspectives about their military experience. A Path to Freedom, it's called. I also promised you a link to his page in the North Carolina Literary Hall of Fame. It's in the show notes, and you can read about some of the other writers in that Hall of Fame. He did tell us a little bit about them, who they were, but there are literally loads. Just click on the bit about inductees and you'll see. He's in truly great company, honestly. And like I said, there's more updates for Lenard. Check the show notes out because he's an absolute force to be reckoned with. And, as you'll see from the photo, a bit of a natty dresser too. Well, there was a lot in this week's podcast. I thank you for joining myself and the Cuttlefish poets. There's a link to the Cuttlefish website in the show notes too. Go and have a meander around all their work. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, do use your social media to let others know about us. By the way, I'm now on Blue Sky as well. Please join me there if you're on that platform. I don't want to be a knobby no mates. And if you have the contacts for any or all of our poets, just get in touch and let them know what you think. It's always nice to know you've been appreciated. We know that ourselves, don't we? So, do join myself and Debbie next week. And until then, keep writing. There's so much in the show notes this week. It would be absolutely criminal not to have a look. So please do go to the website, have a read, and explore all the links. Ciao.